Hi, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, Executive Director of What Wise Women Want. Here on this station, Charlottesville's public access television, COMCAST Channel 13. Every week, we have discussions with women, experts and otherwise, on subjects related to children, to family, all kinds of subjects that women are interested in. Ladies, we're 52% of the population, and we have 85% of the purchasing power. What we want at What Wise Women Want is to encourage you to make informed choices. Our motto is encouraging women's voices to make informed choices. So each week, we'll be talking to you about subjects we hope you'll enjoy. If you'd like to learn about future subjects, you can go to our website, www.whatwisewomenwant.com, and remember, Wize is spelled with a Z. Today, we're going to be talking about education and educational models, alternative education models, 3 in particular: Montessori, Waldorf, and free schools. Now, many of you may have heard of Waldorf and Montessori schools, but free schools you may not have heard of. We're going to get really in depth in talking about these with 3 very interesting women who know an awful lot about it. Our first lady is Wendy Fisher. Wendy is head of school at the Mountaintop Montessori School. Our next lady is Susan Ryan, faculty chair of the Charlottesville Waldorf School. And our third is Gleamer Sullivan, founder of Raw Learning in Stanton, Virginia. Now, ladies, we're going to be talking about what are the essential elements of alternative education models. And so it might be interesting for our audience to find out a little bit of the history of each one of your models, okay? Mm-hmm. So if you wouldn't mind, Wendy, would you start and tell us give us a little bit of background about Montessori?
The Montessori educational model was founded by a female physician from Italy named Dr. Maria Montessori. She was actually the first female to gain a medical degree in Italy, and she was formed by her life between the 2 world wars, and that really had an impact on how she looked at the world. She subsequently, after earning her medical degree, became an anthropologist, which also informed the way that she thought about education. One of the early jobs that she had when she came out of medical school was to take care of the children in a what at that time would have been called a slum in Italy, in Rome. And she found that the children were running wild and that the people in the bureaucracy felt that they were uneducable, and she wanted to prove them wrong. And so she used quite a bit of her knowledge from medical school and from her study of anthropology to sit back and watch the children and look at the idea of teaching them from the standpoint of a scientist. And so she tried lots of different methods and found a very effective way to work with these children. They ended up passing the state exams and gaining entrance into some of the most prestigious schools, and it was a worldwide phenomenon, and she became quite famous. And so the Montessori method was born.
Wasn't she the first medical female?
She was the first woman to graduate from medical school in Italy.
That's what I thought.
Another interesting tidbit was that she was the director of education under Mussolini, and when she criticized his fascist politics, he booted her out of the country, and she ended up spending about a decade or so in India in exile. So.
Suzanne, would you give us a little bit of background on, now it's called the Waldorf School, and for a reason, but it wasn't really a person named Waldorf who started it.
No, the first Waldorf school was started for the children of the factory workers at the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory in Stuttgart, because the director of the factory had been studying anthroposophy under a man named Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of anthroposophy, which is basically an understanding of the human being as a threefold human being, body, soul, and spirit. And so Emil Molt, who was the director of the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory, asked Rudolf Steiner to open a school for the children of his workers. It was a school that was free, and this was in 1918, right after the end of the World War I. And what was done at that school was putting into practice an understanding of education based on how a human being needs to develop in order to be able to form, to become independent, free, he used that word free, in their judgment, not constrained by anything, but to have the full capacity of what it means to be a human being. And from that first school, we had many other schools start. They too were closed down during World War II by Hitler, and then eventually they started up again. There are now over 1,000 around the world.
Well, one of the things that I have said in the past is that I've taught a course that compared and contrast Montessori and Waldorf schools. And I always said that if Montessori and Rudolf Steiner married, they would have revolutionized the world in education. Because I believe that in my opinion, one is more left-brained and one is more right-brained. But we'll get into that later. Gleamer Sullivan is the founder of Raw Learning. Can you tell us what a free school is and what the difference is between a free school and a democratic school and how it started?
Okay. Well, both free schools and democratic schools are mostly based on self-directed learning, child-centered, learner-directed education. So people have been self-directing their education since the beginning of humanity, so this is not something that's new. However, during the industrial age, it was found that the people who came and were taught to be compliant made better factory workers. They sat still, they listened, they took orders. So the industrial age needed factory workers, so they had developed all these schools, and the children went to the schools and learned how to be good workers. And in the last century, there's a great need for self-directed learning. So many communities began forming self-directed learning centers and called free schools, sometimes democratic free schools, popped up all over the world. And one of the most famous is Summerhill, which was started in 1921 by A.S. Neal.
In England.
In England, at least in England, yes. The difference between a democratic school and a free school, though you can have a democratic free school, a free school isn't necessarily democratic because some free schools decide things by consensus, and democratic schools decide things by one vote per person, no matter if that person is 5 or 45. Each person gets one vote. So that's the difference between a free school and a democratic school.
Well, I have to say that I'm particularly interested in all three because I have a Montessori certificate from St. Nicholas in England. I've spent a lot of time at the Sudbury School, which is a democratic school, and I've spent a great deal of time, and so did my children, in Waldorf. So I have a particular interest in all three of these special models. Let's get to, people have heard of these different models, but what are the differences day to day in terms of, for example, in an elementary school, for example, there are time spent units. The day is chopped up into segments. There are textbooks. Well, now there's computers. But how are you the same or different than those kinds of schools? One of the things when I got my certificate from St. Nicholas in England, we had to spend 2 years just observing children. And one of the things that captivated me was 3- and 4-year-olds pouring corn from one container to the other for a half hour, when people told me children of that age shouldn't have an attention span, and I kept wondering, what are they thinking, to be doing that? So how is the Montessori system different than, say, what we have in the United States? All of these systems, well, except for the democratic schools, these two systems came from, beyond our shores.
Mm-hmm. Well, if if I could preface that answer with the prior question, which was what is different about all the models, and you ladies certainly chime in and agree or disagree, but I think that one of the fundamental tenets that sets schools like ours apart is that we are very child-centered and we think about children holistically. We think about their development of executive functions and of character and of relationships with other people, as opposed to trying to train little workers to be compliant and to fit into what is now a very outmoded industrial age model. And so that's, I think, a similarity that will run through all of this conversation.
Yes.
Does that feel
Yes,
comfortable?
almost
Which is
definitely.
why I chose the three of you.
Exactly. Great. Good
Thank
job.
you.
You're welcome. Now, as far as Montessori goes, the question about what is unique about us as a pedagogy, I would say that, again, there are some similarities. We're all really fostering a sense of independence in children. We have faith in children's abilities to do remarkable things. For example, for a 3-year-old to sit and do the same task that's very complicated, for example, with many, many steps in sequence. They do a work that is washing a table, where they do a preparation of probably 8 different items that they set up in a certain way, and then they scrub the table in a particular way. They follow a sequence of steps, they clean it up, and they put it back so that it's perfectly ready for the next child. This is a 3-year-old, mind you. And this is something that this child is capable of doing. And when they're finished with this, after 20 minutes, 30 minutes of deep concentration, they have a sense of peace and of accomplishment and self-confidence. And then they can turn around and teach a younger child the same lesson and have an even more inspired sense of autonomy and that they've chosen this work to do, which helps them to have a deep engagement with their learning.
The first thing that my professor gave us when we were getting Montessori, she passed out this book to all of us. She was they were elderly women. And we opened the book, and I always look at the date when I look at the book, and the book was 50 years old. And she said, this book is in our classroom and has been since it was published. And I thought, wow, what a great respect, in terms of respect for property. So tell us about,
what's unique about a Waldorf
yes.
school. So, as Wendy said, we are very child-centered. But I think what sets Waldorf schools apart is not a direct methodology, not a particular methodology, though there are ways that we teach through storytelling, for instance, that seem unique. But it's primarily the teacher's understanding of the development of the child, so that we adjust the way that we interact with children and teach them based on our understanding of how they are learning. So the very young child, we understand, is learning through direct experience and imitation of adults around them. So the early childhood programs are about experiences. So they're gardening, they're baking, they're cooking, they're sewing, they're playing and having social interactions which are monitored by their teachers. And their language experiences are also empathetic experiences of what their teachers are doing, puppet shows that their teachers put on, stories that they tell. When we go into the grade school, it's primarily through presentations that are given directly by the teachers of everything from history to physics, but in such a way that the children can develop a direct connection, a feeling for the material, and feel deeply connected to whatever's being presented to them. And also that 8 years from 1st through 8th grade, where we have the possibility for one teacher to stay with the class for 8 years and develop a connection with individual children, which is very important for this, that we have this loving authority figure for these children for those 8 years. And then going into the Waldorf High School, we recognize that teenagers are interacting with the world in a different way. They can take up abstract concepts. We expect them to use their developing judgment and to think about things in a way that we didn't expect them to do as younger children. So we adjust our approaches to the children based on our understanding of how they are experiencing the world around them.
Okay. And how is yours uniquely different? Gleamer?
Well, at free schools and at Raw Learning, we honor each student in person as a unique individual and trust them to self-direct their education. So they know where only they know their mind and where their path is going, and we as adults or the people who are providing support and resources and opportunities for them don't claim to know that. So we trust that they know that. So whatever support they need, we provide it for them as they direct their learning. So for example, if they want to learn about cars when they're 3, we help them learn about cars when they're 3, or if they're 13, or if they're 16. It's at different levels, of course, at greatly different levels, and it depends on exactly where the child is. But we follow them, and they direct the learning.
Well, I remember the story of the young man at the Sudbury School. He was incarcerated at a very young age. He couldn't be tolerated at all in public school. And they put him in the Sudbury School, and they just waited for him. And waited and waited. He went fishing every single day. He found a friend to go fishing with, and they went fishing every single day for 2 years. And the parents were very patient because he apparently calmed down by going fishing every day. And then one day, I think he was 16 years old, and he said, "I'm ready to learn math." And he learned all the levels of math in a year. So, I saw that when a child is ready from that experience, that, when they're ready to learn, they're ready to learn. I wanted to ask you a question about something you said, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty now. So a teacher follows the student throughout 6 years?
It can be 8 years.
8 years, okay. So the teacher follows. What if they don't get along with that teacher?
That's a very common question, and as a teacher, that's not so much the issue, because my job is to get to know these children and to adapt to them. So I'm in a classroom with 25, 30 different learners. I need to meet them, and every teacher has this, right? I'm teaching about Julius Caesar, so how is this child needing to hear about Julius Caesar? Do they need to hear about the stabbing? Does it need to be really gory? Or does it need to be that they act it out? Or does it need to be that I draw a picture? Or do they need me to give the complete overall picture of Rome at that time? And do they need to talk about it with one another? So it's my understanding of not only the general developmental stage of these children, but them as individuals in the room.
But I'm a psychologist, and they can press your buttons. So, and if they continue to do that for 8 years.
Right, so one thing as a Waldorf teacher one does is work on oneself.
Okay.
And so it is one of the first things that you have to do is develop your artistic ability, painting, drawing, playing a musical instrument, and singing. So that's almost easy. But then working on yourself as a human being. So if I happen to be a quick-tempered person, I'd better watch myself with the equally quick-tempered child in the front row, right? How do I interact with that child? And so that is as much of my job as a teacher as preparing lessons.
So it's much like a family, you're stuck with that person for, just kidding.
Well,
for 8 years, and you have to learn, and that's a learning process, the interaction between the two. I know that's a typical question everybody asks.
If I could jump in a moment,
Sure.
because I've observed some similarities between Montessori teachers and Waldorf teachers, in that it's the successful teachers who last and who end up being positive, have positive impacts on the children, are the people who are able to develop a social emotional competence that's probably remarkable compared to the average person on the street, because you are developing these very deep relationships with children. You need to be incredibly consistent. You need to have a presence and be very mindful about your interactions, have warmth, but also have authority. It's a particular way of being and relating to another person that needs to be cultivated, and there are very meaningful ways to cultivate that. And
now, Montessori is much more structured in a sense, than Waldorf. I mean, it's a little bit looser.
I might disagree.
No, because...
I think it depends on what you're talking about.
Right. Well, I was going to get into that, because you give a lesson, and it has to be done in a particular way. for example, you suggested the table washing, but there's other things that elude me at the moment. But, you will sit down with the whole class and have a lesson about whatever the activity is, and everybody performs that lesson in the same way. Isn't that? No. Go ahead.
At the early childhood level, it's individualized. You give a lesson to one child at a time, and you're modeling an exact way to do the lesson, but the child is welcome to do that lesson in the way that it moves them to do the lesson, as long as it is respectful of the material and
Give an
respectful.
example of a lesson. Let's say for a first grader.
For a first grader.
Yeah.
So there's a lesson that first graders would have on a large board that has multicolored checker. It's called the checkerboard. So imagine a sort of large-sized checker board with different colors. And there are beads 1 through 10 that you have in a box, and so you'll have a lesson on dynamic multiplication on this board. And so the teacher will give the child a lesson on how to, and they've had many, many lessons from early childhood on. They understand how to exchange the decimal system, how to exchange units for tens and all of that. This material makes concrete the act of doing dynamic multiplication.
So that it's not written or from a textbook, it's experiential.
Right. Now it moves into writing. The lesson sort of segues into writing as the child has experiences with the material. And often they'll end up being able to do the algorithm without the material, and you'll often see second and third graders who have moved on, but they just bring the material out because it's a good friend that sits next to them while they're toiling away with their pencil and paper. But so some children do the math in their head, and they just exchange the beads, and other children will count painstakingly. There's not a right or a wrong way. And
well, I learned from my son from the process of going through Montessori for 2 years. He was 5 years old, and somebody was putting a window in an empty space. And he said, no, that's not going to fit. And he could visually see the difference. And when the man put it up, it was much too small for the window. So, there's a lot of information besides for multiplication and measuring and things that children get. Gleamer, when I was in the school and I'm sorry I haven't been to yours as yet, but the children selected the teachers. Does that happen in your school? There were adults walking around the school one day that I was there, and I said, what are you doing? They said, we're vying for our position for next year. It's the students who hire us. So your school hires the teachers?
All of our teachers are volunteers. And since our classes are non-compulsory, the teachers have to be very excellent. So the student can choose not to come at all, or if they become bored, they can leave. So our teachers are enthusiastic and engaging and great teachers. So they essentially fire them by not coming.
That's exactly what I was getting to.
So they don't say...
That's exactly what
I was getting to. They don't say it like
to.
at the beginning of the year, we vote, with my vote, I'm going to hire blah, blah, blah. They say, with their feet, I think you're a great teacher. I am eager to learn from you. Or, I think there might be some other things I'm going to go do now.
So that is exactly what I was getting to. It's the students who decide in the way they participate whether or not the teacher is going to be coming back next year or part of the program again. Let's go to more specifics about the program. Let's go to character development. In in your school, who does the discipline, in terms of when students go against the rules or act out, or who does the discipline?
Well, first of all, the rules are made by the community. So the 4-year-old has just as much say in the rules as I do. And we all come together on the rules. Let's say one of our rules is you cannot destroy raw learning property. And the rule came about because somebody got very upset because a favorite raw learning toy got destroyed. And so a meeting was called, and we all came to the decision that it would be best if no one was able to destroy raw learning property. You could only destroy your own property. So it wasn't that I decided, because I'm big and old, that that should be a good idea. We all decided. So since we all decided, and the students decided, they own the rule too. So there's much less, hey, I said not to destroy the toy. It's more, we decided. We all decided. So if somebody does go and destroy a raw learning toy or property, we know that either one, they were new and maybe they didn't know the rule, or they're very, very upset about something. And that's a whole nother issue that needs much love and empathy and compassion to help that person heal so that they can move on. And once they move on and heal, usually they're very sorry for what they did, and they usually try to replace the broken toy.
So do you have the law process?
No,
the
we do
attorneys?
not.
You don't have that. Okay.
No,
Because some democratic schools
right,
have,
and we're not.
Judges and all that kind of thing.
We feel that it's more compassionate to have restorative justice, to feel love and compassion for if there are two parties, both parties harmed, rather than putting blame and shame on one party and saying, this is your fault and this is how you're going to be reprimanded. We send love and caring to both and help them both heal.
And character development in Waldorf schools?
We don't have a particular program or particular approach to it. It's really up to each individual teacher. The thinking is that you're developing the whole human being with everything that we're doing, so that the artistic work, for instance, is developing the child's connection to the world so that they have a sense of who they are, and the social experiences that they have within the classroom are monitored by the teacher. A lot of what you've just said, teachers do out of much of it's common sense and compassion for these children, right, wanting to help bring them back to feeling comfortable and not being upset, and bring the two parties of the dispute back together again so they can be in the classroom together again. But it's a long relationship that we are looking at having, and so it matters a great deal to us that we find whatever way we can to help children integrate with one another, to help them be in a classroom so that they're learning successfully, and to help them feel themselves meaningful in the world and that they have some purpose in the world eventually.
Well, one of our other mottos is inspiring women's roles to guide children's souls. And I think three of your three systems and models definitely have that. And I know that from reading Montessori and Steiner. Developing a child from the inside out rather than imposing things on them. So character development, obviously respect for property, bringing those aspects and respect for each other out of it. One of the things I remember about a Montessori school I visited was that the children, there was this long line of children out on the playground. And I turned around the corner to look, and here was this young man holding the water for everyone, counting, so that to make sure everybody got their drink individually. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing?
Well, and my guess would be that was just something the children came up with as a fair way of doing something, that it wasn't imposed by the adults as here's how we give water to people. Yeah. So.
And I think that's a comparison of, in most of our educational systems around the United States, it's all about imposing curriculum, teachers, administration, laws, rather than coming from the inside out from the children. And how would you consider character development in terms of your model?
Well, a little bit of a historical tidbit to lay the foundation. Maria Montessori spent a lot of her later years and her mid-years thinking about peace and world peace, and her sense was that a humane and child-centered educational model would help children to develop into human beings who would make the world a more peaceful place and would essentially, one would hope, find better ways to solve problems than going to war. And that was, of course, very informed by her life experiences between the two world wars. And she was, in fact, nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize twice. I like to joke that
wow.
she lost to Gandhi once, so that was an unfair. But we have very similar ways of thinking about character development. Some of the ways that if you want to talk about discipline, we spend a lot of time setting up the environments in a Montessori classroom and community to be very child-centered and developmentally appropriate. So if you set up an environment that's inviting and that's accessible and that doesn't have a lot of false barriers, then the children, that erases many of the discipline issues that you see in a traditional setting.
Yes.
So that's the physical environment. Then we emphasize a deep connection to the people around you. And so you get a sense of my actions matter. My actions impact this person I care about. This person's actions impact me. And we don't squash that. We are in the moment with that. We live that. We talk about it. We have a whole curriculum that we call Grace and Courtesy that is about how you move about in the world, how you take care of the things and the people around you, and how you relate. Just as is true in Waldorf, and I would be surprised if this is not the case in a free school, we also emphasize a deep connection to nature and to the environment with a stewardship for that, which builds this larger sense of bigger than me. Right. My actions have consequences that matter in ways that are beyond just the thing that I'm doing right now with the person, right now. Our students spend a significant period of time in the beginning part of every year developing their own constitutions and what we call a code of civility, where they come to agreements about how they're going to interact with one another and the agreements that the adults make with how we're going to be respectful to one another. And these are very powerful. When a child owns their own set of guidelines, it's so much more powerful than something that is just this arbitrary adult-imposed set of rules and regulations.
I'd like to remind you all that you are watching, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and you are watching What Wise Women Want on Charlottesville's public access television, COMCAST Channel 13. And today we're talking about what are the essential elements of alternative models in education. Specifically, we have Wendy Fisher from the Mountaintop Montessori School, Suzanne Ryan from the Charlottesville Waldorf School, and Gleamer Sullivan from the Raw Learning Center in Stanton. If you'd like to learn more about the women that are talking here today, each one of them has a page on our website, www.whatwisewomenwant.com, and of course, Wize is spelled with a Z, W-I-Z-E. And we'll continue with our conversation on the essential elements of alternative schools. But I want to remind you that we also do fireside chats at City Space the third Saturday of every month, and we talk about issues concerning women. We have about 5 experts that come. We'll be talking about women and money, children, toys, creativity, and intelligence, and many other topics. So let's get back to our subject. What are the essential elements of these alternative models? And one of the things that really is impressive about the Waldorf education is the fact that the students create their own textbooks. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think maybe saying they create their own textbooks is a little misleading. It's more like a portfolio that they create.
Right.
And so we don't use many textbooks except as sources of math problems, for instance, or grammar exercises. These books that we call main lesson books come out of the work that they do in main lesson, which is the first 2 hours of every day. And that's taught by the class teacher. And these lessons are taught in basically units that last from 3 to 4 weeks. And what the children do is they hear a presentation from their teacher, say on ancient Greek gods. And then the next day they might write a composition that reflects what they've heard, draw a picture, draw a map. If it's a science block that they're in, they might have observed or done some activities around, let's say, the lime cycle, making mortar for building a wall. And the next day, they'd be asked to draw what they did and to write out explicitly the actions that they had put in, that they had done in class the day before. But what we do is we actually ask them to make a book. And so their writing, their handwriting is expected to be just so. Their drawings are expected to be accurate. And we put a lot of effort into teaching children how to draw accurately. They learn, they become quite skilled in all of these areas, not just academics, but also the visual arts. And so these books are actually quite beautiful representations of what they have learned. When they're younger, they tend to be pretty directly what the teachers have given them, but as they grow older, we asked children to write their own compositions more, to elaborate, to write argumentative essays even sometimes. But what this does is that it gives the children the ability to do something out of their understanding, their feeling for something, and their ability. So we talk about thinking, feeling, and willing exercises for all children. And this is the willing part, getting this down on paper.
Now, the schools, school districts, public schools, and even private schools have to follow state laws. Mm-hmm. Let's take one little segment in particular, time spent units. And by that I mean, the school is broken up into segments. You have geography, you have mathematics, you have English at another time, and it's broken up into 45-minute or 55-minute segments. So tell me, do you have this at the free school?
No.
No.
So I can speak to that a little bit.
Well, let's hear the free school first. So what do you do about that?
The law says you have to have either 180 days or 990 teachable hours. So hours, and in public school, even though they're there like 7 hours, they only have 5 teachable hours.
Right.
So we count every minute that they're at raw learning as a teachable hour because they are learning every moment, whether they're in raw learning or out, it doesn't matter. They're learning all the time. So that's what the law says. It doesn't say you have to have so many hours on geography or whatever. It just says you have to have teachable hours.
Okay.
And that's what we have.
Excellent. And Montessori?
Well, I was going to speak to the larger private school issue in the state of Virginia, which is we are really...
So you're all considered private schools?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are lucky. Virginia has written into its code that the Board of Education oversees only public schools, and the Virginia Council for Private Education oversees all the private schools. This is very unique. I think there are 3 other states in the entire nation that have this same model, and I sat on that board for several years, and so it provides our private schools with a lot of freedom to educate children in the way that they see fit. And so we're not under the jurisdiction of the Board of Education at all.
So you don't have to do SOLs and all the other kinds of things that public schools have to do?
No.
Okay, I have a question to ask you. Do you consider yourself, well, I guess in private schools, because it's so different, I often feel that teachers are confused at whether they are public servants or professionals. Because for the most part, a lot of times they're treated as public servants and not as professionals. But I can see from the 3 of you that that doesn't exist in your kinds of schools, that you feel, you are at a professional. You're trained, but you're also there for your children as well, which I think, I don't think anybody would go into a doctor's office, any legislator would go into a doctor's office and tell the doctor exactly what they needed to do. And, the private schools have that ability to be able to have the professionalism that you all do. Would anybody like to speak to that in terms of teaching? Suzanne?
I think it's the level of, we could call it autonomy, the respect that's given to people who one expects to know what they're doing and to be able to make judgments in the classroom. And I think we're all coming from school models where we expect our teachers to be able to not only take care for the children, watch them, and convey a curriculum, but make decisions in the moment that are in the best interest of these children and their long-term education. And that's something that in our society today is not generally given to teachers, especially of early childhood, in the early childhood and grade school level. And for us at the Waldorf schools, this is central, that our teachers have this ability to make decisions. And so we look for people who are not necessarily coming to us with a degree in education, but who have life experience and who have real skills that they can then convey to these children and give to these children through their education. And so I find it extremely important that teachers everywhere have this ability, and really good teachers, no matter what school they're in, are able to do this.
So what you're saying, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you look at what motivates people to do their best work and to really optimize the impact that they can make, teachers included, they need autonomy, they need control, they need to feel mastery over the work that they're doing. And I have the pleasure of being a doctoral candidate at the Curry School of Education, so for the most part, my cohort there is public school traditional educators, and you've not met a more talented, dedicated group of people. They're just operating under a system that is difficult.
I agree.
So,
I agree. I feel like the vast majority of the public school teachers that I personally know are doing the absolute best they can to help the children learn and care for them, and it feels like they're, in some ways, quite oppressed.
Weighted down by paperwork and regulations and rules. I mean, the notion that we don't even touch our children, you know. I know you all don't have that for fear of being sued,
Right.
you know, it doesn't exist where you are. Oftentimes people talk about private schools and alternative schools as places where a certain kind of child might go. Is there a certain characteristic or a certain type of child that might participate in your particular schools, or is it virtually any child or every child? What do you think?
Every child.
Yes, I think the only thing that we, as our particular school here in Charlottesville, are faced with is that we don't have specialists to work with children who have severe learning disabilities. But aside from that, really just about any child can thrive in a Waldorf school.
And I would agree. And our mission is to more and more expand our population to children with more socioeconomic diversity. So we're pretty proud of some of the inroads that we're making there.
And you probably all have scholarships and things like that available to students everywhere. Okay, so these are three really diverse models of alternative education. Why did you pick the one you picked?
I fell into the one that I chose because I was a very young mom in my mid-20s, and my oldest child was of preschool age, and the coolest kids in the neighborhood happened to go to a Montessori school. And so I just piggybacked on that. And these were just very independent and kind of not edgy, but questioning and creative and interesting small children. And I thought, wow, that's what I want for my children. That's amazing. And so I was so fascinated with the pedagogy. I observed the classrooms for hours and hours and hours. And finally, the head of school said to me, you know, there's this great place where you can go and you can get Montessori training if you really think that this is something you'd like to do. And so then I never looked back.
Excellent. Suzanne,
When
why did you pick Waldorf?
When I was 19, a college classmate of mine said, you should be a Waldorf teacher. And so she arranged for me to go and observe classes at a Waldorf school. And I wasn't interested when I was 19. I actually got my degree from Teachers College at Columbia in elementary education and taught in the New York City public schools for a while. But realized then, as No Child Left Behind was being implemented, that this was not something that I could do. I didn't feel that it was that it was very humane what I was doing with the children. And I had been studying anthroposophy, which is the foundation of Waldorf education, for many years, since my friend had told me that I should be a Waldorf teacher. And I knew many teachers at the Waldorf School in New York City, which is the first Waldorf school in North America, the Rudolf Steiner School. And they hired me to take a first grade. And so I learned while I was doing it. I had excellent mentors all along and have felt that this felt right to me. What I was doing with children finally felt right.
Excellent. Gleamer, how did you choose free school?
I discovered Summerhill. And And at that...
Did you go to England?
I didn't. Although I lived in England before that, but I didn't know about summer help. So I was at a point in my life where I saw that restrictive parenting and forcing children to comply with my wishes was not working for my children. And I decided, along with my husband, to change what we were going to do to work with our children. And I read some articles by Alfie Kohn, and then I read A.S. Neal's books, and I saw that children are whole, equal human beings that deserve trust and honor and respect. And so I wanted the education for my children, as well as their classmates, to follow that. So I didn't see anything that was like that in our area, so I decided to start one myself.
Well, you three obviously influence the lives of children every day. I'd like to know what woman influenced your life. Do you have any particular female that influenced your life?
Yep.
Anyone?
My mom.
Your mom?
Uh-huh. She raised 7 children and is still growing and learning.
Excellent. Suzanne?
She was a mentor of mine at the Rudolf Steiner School who had come to teaching as a mother and a handwork teacher, and she was to me the epitome of professionalism and artistry and wisdom, and so I've been grateful to have her stay with me all along.
Wendy?
So I am thrilled that I'm the mother of 5 children, but the woman who has influenced me a lot over the past 28 years is my eldest daughter. And she is the most open-hearted, curious, intellectually stimulated, can-do young woman that I have ever met. She just spent the last 3 years raising her 3-year-old daughter and finishing law school and remaining deeply committed to, she and her husband are very committed to values of sustainability, and they live their lives very true to these values. She's just a remarkable, dedicated young woman. So she's my hero.
All right. So how do you balance your life? I mean, you're working with children every day. How do you come home to children? How do you keep that balance of your personal life, your career, your family, your husbands? How do you manage all that, especially in this, fast-paced world that we live in today?
For me, it's all pretty well integrated right now. My children go to the school, and my husband is often there, and so it's, I don't know, it all just seems to flow together, and I am thinking about my work quite a lot because it matters a great deal to me. I'm always reading, and when I was teaching, I'm not teaching much anymore, but I was reading, and it was wonderful having the assignment to read up on Roman history or the Renaissance, or learn how to draw in perspective and learn how to play the flute if I had to, the recorder, excuse me. But it all becomes part of working on myself and developing myself. So.
Right, in the Waldorf school, you have to keep up with the student every year, so you're having to be first grade, second grade, third grade. It's not like a regular public school where you're teaching the same thing year after year after year.
Always learning, yes.
But I love that because I think it's so, it goes against the grain to say that everything integrates with everything. You get this advice from people who want you to be balanced, and they say keep your work at work and keep your home at home, and that does not work for me either. Everything flows with everything. My children and my friends and the people I care about and the people, everything is part of the work that I do. Mm-hmm. And so it's so meaningful, and I don't think creating boundaries is necessary for balance or health at all.
Excellent.
I feel it's the same way. It's similar to learning. Learning doesn't start at the beginning of the school day and end when school shuts down. Mm-hmm. It's all just life, and so is work and play and my children and my friends and my colleagues, everyone.
So it all just stays in balance.
Yeah.
Somehow or other.
Yes.
It just kind of, everything kind of integrates and flows in between each other. All right, I hope you prepared. Just kidding. Is there a quote that influenced your life in any way that you can think of? Anyone?
Well, I have several that I will probably mangle. There's one you can help me with, John Holt, right?
Oh, yeah?
He has something.
John Holt is homeschooling.
Correct.
Unschooling, yeah.
Unschooling, which is, he says something along the lines of we need to stop teaching children so they can actually think.
Mm-hmm. What to think. Stop teaching children Stop teaching children what to think and instead teach them how to think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then Maria Montessori, she has a gorgeous quote, the child is both the hope and the promise for mankind.
Excellent. Gleamer, do you have a quote?
Well, one that comes to mind is by A.S. Neal, and it is that something to the effect of keep the emotion in, not the emotion in check. Ooh, this mangling is definitely it's contagious. Yes. When the emotion is taken care of, the intellect will follow. It's something.
There it is.
Something.
There it is.
Very good. So this isn't a quote from Rudolf Steiner, but it's something that was said to me by a colleague many years ago when I was kind of stumped. I think I was trying to figure out how to teach place value to second graders, and he just walked in my room and said, it's just a common sense education. And so that recognition that it's just, well, so what is common sense? It's a kind of wisdom, right, that you work on through, that you develop through experience and through learning, and that's what is needed to be a good teacher.
All right. In schools, in public schools, in most schools, we measure success by testing. Now, I know you all don't test in your schools, so how do you measure a student's success?
Well, we actually do give some tests,
You do?
not the SOL standardized tests. So, but we don't usually start until the children are older. And that's one way that we measure success, but we're also looking at how engaged the children are in the activities that we're giving them. And then in conversation with them, how are they expressing the ideas that they're experiencing around them? But we also have them put on a play every year. So there's a performance, right? They're asked to recite poetry. And
St. George.
Right. And so there are these real moments when, as with their main lesson book, it's not just practice. This is it. This is their work, and this is their play, and this is their musical performance.
So demonstration, testing.
So demonstration,
some testing,
and a sense of the ruddiness of their cheeks. If their cheeks are rosy when you walk out of the classroom, then you have a sense that you've done your job well, right? So there are a lot of different parameters that we're looking at as teachers.
So there isn't just one particular thing. It's
No.
a multitude of things.
Yes.
Which probably makes it much harder for the teacher in terms of, trying to access what it is that the student has accomplished.
Right.
How about in Montessori?
Very similar. My dissertation is actually around student engagement as the way that you measure success in learning. So I'm so pleased that you said that. But we look at things like ability to problem solve and to have the resilience to overcome challenges. Mm-hmm. We look at also we talk about the 3-period lesson, which is where the first period is where you demonstrate to the child what the concept is, and the second period is where the child is showing you that they can work with this and that they're gaining some understanding of it. The third period is where they do the show or their performance, or they teach someone else, or they create a product. And the second period, where we are different than a traditional model, is the second period may take 5 minutes, it may take 5 years. And we are very respectful of how long that seed needs to germinate before it, grows into something.
So everyone learns differently in a different pace.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Gleamer.
We don't have any measurement whatsoever. We respect that the student will learn at their own pace and at their own time. We see that as they are respected and honored, they move from one step to another, but not in a flow. It's usually in jerks and spurts. They'll spend so much time on reading or on emotional development or social development, and they won't do any mathematics or number sense for a long, long time. And then they'll dive into that one. So it's not, we need to measure this, and they need to be here or there. We respect their own individual paths, wherever that might be. Where we really make sure we support them immensely is their emotional development. Because if they're emotionally hindered, they don't care very much about anything, especially academics or even beauty or sometimes life, because they're so emotionally hindered. So we make sure that they are developing emotionally and support them to meet their needs.
All right. And what is the report card? How do you let the parents know if you're not doing testing? How do you let parents know the development of their child?
We write a narrative report on each child, and by the time they're in 8th grade, it's a pretty lengthy
At the
one.
end of the year, or?
At the end of every year, we write a narrative report on each child, and we touch on everything from their social development to their academic skills, their artistic work, their musical ability, their physical development, especially in the lower grades. It's one of the things that we pay particular attention to.
What parents tell me is that when their child gets out of the car in the morning with joy and excitement, and then they have to lure them back at the end of the day to come home, we do these things as well, but that's the report card.
Yeah.
That their child is thrilled to be there, and that they feel the grown-ups feel a sense of community as well, and their child is happy and learning and joyful.
How do you communicate with parents?
We have interactive conversations. We don't have written reports. We work together as a community to make sure each individual is getting the response that they need and the feedback that they need about their child. And we've all agreed that a written report really isn't necessary. They trust and know their child is learning, and they just want to know what they've been doing during the day. So we jot down little notes, and we take a lot of pictures. We save every single creation, and we show that to the parent at the end of the day. And they can see for themselves what their children have been learning about.
Oh, there's so much more I'd like to be talking about here. You know, we're just getting into the nitty-gritty. I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski. This is What Wise Women Want on Charlottesville Public Access, COMCAST, Charlottesville Public Access Television, COMCAST Channel 13. And we have been here today with our three amazing ladies. Wendy Fisher, who's head of school at the Mountaintop Montessori School. Suzanne Ryan, the faculty chair of the Charlottesville Waldorf School. And Gleamer Sullivan, the founder of Raw Learning, which is in Stanton, a free school. Again, we have here every week, so please join us. Next week we'll be talking about what constitutes a good education. So please join us Tuesdays from 10 to 11. And thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.